Hey everybody, let's talk about building beautiful bases. Base building games are my favorite, and I'm talking about games where the player builds the base they want to build, not games where you're just trying to win. So, we're not talking about tower defense bases or factories. We're talking about The Sims or RimWorld or Minecraft or No Man's Sky. They're getting worse, aren't they? Yeah. Yeah, the base building games are getting worse. And I'm not trying to be like, oh, back in my day. No, I mean, our fidelity is going up. But the actual quality of the bases we're allowed to build going way down. It's not keeping up with the fidelity, and that contrast is really starting to show. Classically, most base building games are on grids. The base is on a grid, the world is on a grid, everything is a grid. This is true of The Sims and Evil Genius and everything else, Minecraft and all that jazz. The game communicates in terms of grids. So you're like, okay, well, you were outside and this is a tree and this is a cliff. And it's just like a simple symbol in that one little tile on the grid. This is a goblin and this is a drawbridge. So when you go and you build your base, and it's like, okay, this is my wall, and this is my bed, we think in terms of how the game already communicates with us, and so the game is communicating on a grid, and we're communicating on a grid. Everything works out. We see our little multicolored dots, and we think, oh, this is a vast mountain base full of fantasy creatures that I've put together. Works fine. But when the game starts to communicate a little bit more fluently, what happens? Let's say that we're playing No Man's Sky. A new release came out pretty recently, and a bunch of us played it. The game has some marvelous visuals, just these beautiful plants and animals and rocks and stuff all being generated on the fly, right? Here's our beautiful animal. You can tell. It's so beautiful. It's got crystals and all sorts of stuff coming off, and it's just glorious. And then what's your base? You're going to build a cool base. What's your base going to be? Ah, truly inspiring. A box. And I'm not going to pretend that No Man's Sky is particularly bad about this. Nearly every base building game that has a full three-dimensional world, wow, the bases look terrible and they feel terrible. And that's because the game communicates via a free-flowing set of rolling hills and grass that goes from one end of the hill to the other, and you got plants popping up everywhere and animals roaming as they please. And then you're still stuck on a grid for your base. The game doesn't communicate via grids, not even three-dimensional grids. The game communicates via freeform meshes and all sorts of stuff like that, and the base just has no way to communicate it the same way, the same plane, and it just doesn't work out. The base feels ugly because it's a base from Dwarf Fortress, and you're playing No Man's Sky. Of course, I say that, but the bases in No Man's Sky can't ever get anywhere near the bases in Dwarf Fortress. We'll talk about that later. What sort of bases might you want to build in a game like No Man's Sky with those beautiful exteriors? Maybe you'll go for something that's got a Star Wars-y feel. It's got this brutalist concrete architecture with these giant concrete slopes that soak up the heat of the sun or whatever. And then they go up, and there's something cool happening up here. And then down here we've got these slopes where we've got an entrance for vehicles or whatever. And then we've got some glass windows in here. That would be a pretty cool base, don't you think? This really neat, nifty little concrete structure that looks like it's saying something. It looks like it exists for a reason, like it belongs here in this place and at this time. Maybe you'll go for a Frank Lloyd Wright style Star Trek visual with sweeping glass curves overlooking onto this giant plain, and then they got concrete down here, and then there's like a thing coming in, and it's like this spider web of support structures, and then you've got this cool, like maybe an elevator or something here, and then it comes out. We got stuff down here, and then back here we've got this cool little shark tail sort of thing going on, and it's like cool, neat shit. I can see both of these bases looking pretty slick. You can't build them. They're just not buildable. Now, No Man's Sky does have some round structures. You could theoretically build this, although it would just be an empty place. There wouldn't be anything in it that's like an elevator or anything. But the way that it does that, it inherits its round structures from Subnautica. It uses identical structures. The difference is that Subnautica's bases are intended to be survival bases where there's not like a whole lot of extra room. You're supposed to feel cramped. When you have the freedom to build larger things and you want to build larger things and all that you have are these canned modules, whether they're boxes or circles, you're really going to have a tough time of it. It's not going to fit into the outside world. The insides are going to look like crap. It's not going to feel like it works in the place it is. Because we're trying to talk. We're trying to make a base that says something, that does something, that has a presence in the game. And that means that it's got to be able to say something about the place it's in. It's got to be able to say something about the purpose it has. And if you're building everything out of boxes, that's probably not going to be very easy to do. Not unless the boxes are very, very small. Let's talk a little bit about the core problem here. The core problem is the modules we're using. Let's say that we're using box modules. We could also be using circle modules or whatever. It doesn't matter. The box module idea here is that if you put two box modules next to each other, it's a 2x1x1 room. Wonderful, magical, but here's the problem. This is a membrane. The devs, when they create this module, they think of it as a way to separate the exterior space from the interior space, the outside from the inside. But that's not how you build a facility. I mean, sure, you do separate the outside from the inside, but it's not a membrane. There's a lot of outside, and there's a lot of inside, and there's a lot of permeability. We need to stop thinking in terms of a membrane. This membrane approach is very close to what we would get with an old school grid, and I think it's a big reason why we're seeing that old school grid pop up in places where it just does not belong. There's a couple of ways we could do away with the membrane. One would obviously be to add some stuff. So it's not a membrane and it's got some exterior presence to it. But that's really not going to help a whole lot because that doesn't alleviate the fundamental gridness. Let's go ahead and come up with some basics of how you might do something with a more current generation techniques rather than just grids. If we were going to build that giant concrete structure for our Star Wars-y sort of base, we need to ask a couple of questions. First, why would we build it like this? And second, how would we build it like this? So if we've got this giant concrete structure, how and why would we build it like this? Well, if we're trying to fit in with the world, what we would want is a world where the exterior is not something we want to have as a membrane. There's got to be a reason why we're using giant concrete slabs instead. Is the dust storm going to be hitting and just covering this whole side with sandblasty elements? It's going to wear away anything that's over there. We can't use glass, so it'll just wear away the glass, right? But if we point our glass in a direction that the sand doesn't come from, maybe that's okay. Is it the heat of the sun pounding down? We can't let it into the base because it'll just overheat the base. So we use just a couple of windows and we use massive heat sinks, concrete heat sinks. There are lots of other reasons that we might do it with concrete. Maybe this concrete is actually just there to protect giant tanks that we have. It's not actually interior space. It's just a space for our tanks inside the concrete where they can't get damaged. Maybe it's like this because we want to be able to land spaceships on top of it. And hey, the best way to do that is to make sure that there's nothing below the spaceships that can actually get damaged. If they land hard, who cares? It's concrete. There are a ton of reasons why we might conceivably want to build these concrete slabs, but here's the kicker. We have to be able to build them freely as we like, not as the concrete slab module. And that's where things start to get a little bit challenging. How do we build these concrete slabs? Do we just go, oh, look, here is our palette of options, and here's like a, interior base concrete slab. Oh, that's the one we want. Drag it out and then build it, and it looks like that every single time. That's going to be tough to work with. What I would recommend, and this is something that is not that hard these days, I would recommend you just let the player stretch and skew core fundamental zoning shapes. So, for example, if we have a concrete slab shape, it's going to be something, slab-like this maybe, or square even. But by allowing the player to stretch and skew it, they can easily change it so that it looks like this. Or this. Or whatever they need, right? If you're doing a Frank Lloyd Wright style arc, glass arc, maybe you've got a glass arc that is a quarter circle. This is your normal glass arc for circular shapes, and the player just grabs this edge and drags it, and it goes into this nice arc like this because they've dragged it. That seems like it's not challenging to do, but the problem is there is a lot of complexity in terms of where the collider is, where the inside are, what you're going to do with grid matching for interior elements. But that sort of stuff is bearable. At the very least, you could always chop it up into nearest fits. You could always say, well, we're going to just have triangular internal shape here, and then box, and then triangular internal shape here with the box down below. You can always do a best fit at the very end if you need to. This isn't something where we absolutely need to be able to fill every inch of this with machinery. That's not the point, and it never was. The idea of allowing the player to stretch and skew is hardly new. There are some spaceship games coming out that allow you to do just that. But at present, they don't allow you to build a spaceship that has meaning. They don't allow you to want a particular kind of spaceship. I mean, you can want it, but they have no feedback for you. You can build a cool ship that's got all the stretched stuff that you want to stretch and all that jazz, and the game will just say, okay, that's fine. That's why it's so important that we allow these bases to be part of the world, part of the planet that you've put them on. And I think that is something we don't see enough of. When someone in No Man's Sky goes to build a base, they're just building a base. It doesn't matter what planet they're on. It doesn't matter what's going on in the world. I mean, they can search for, I want to have, a mining rig, so I need to search for a place with some mineral and maybe some free power or something. But they're not building a base that is specific to the planet they're on. They're not being like, oh, well, this is an acid environment, so I need to do this or that. Or this is a cold environment, so I need to do this or that. Very, very sparse sort of implementation there. A couple of things, like you can put a heater, but that's not going to shape the base, is it? You want to have the whole base get shaped. So instead of this, you've got something that makes more sense. What do you want for your cold base? Well, maybe you need real thick walls, so you have like maybe a double dome of some kind. And then you put your base inside of the dome. That would be fun. Maybe you've got a situation where you know that there's going to be snow coming down, so you build your base with sloped roofs specifically to dump all that snow off. And then the snow ends up kind of gathered on the ground here in a big pile. That would put the base on the planet. And if you go in hot, you got similar issues. You want to put the base on the planet. Similarly, we need to have things that aren't just exteriors and interiors. Can we have gardens? We obviously should be able to have something like a garden. These are inhabited planets full of people, things you can do. People, creatures, and plants and stuff. Can we have a refinery section? Sure, the game doesn't really understand what you'd want with a refinery section, though. There has to be a purpose, a set of things we need to do, and a set of challenges we need to overcome, and those need to be part of the structure of the base. Not the modules on the inside, not the modules on the outside, but the core physical structure. The concrete embankments, the walls, the stairs. And only then will we be able to build a base that actually fits in to the rest of the game. Oh, look, here's a beautiful fern, an alien fern growing on this wonderful planet, and we have built a cool base that actually lives in the same sort of dimensionality and speaks the same sort of language as the fern. It's not a grid. Beautiful, right? Yeah, beautiful. Anyway, that's what I'm talking about. I don't know whether or not I'm making that much sense because it is quite late at night, but I had to get it off my chest. Thanks for listening.